On my first day, I arrived early, the kind of early where the sun hasn't fully risen and the world feels like it's holding its breath. The school loomed in front of me, an old, towering building that looked like it had been forgotten by time. The walls were stained, layers of paint peeling away to reveal years of neglect, and the air around it felt heavy, almost alive. I told myself it was just nerves. First days are always strange, especially at a new school. But this place, it had a reputation. People whispered about it, though no one ever said why. I brushed it off. Work was work, and I needed this job. The classroom they assigned me was at the end of a long, dimly lit corridor, just past the main stairwell. A small plaque by the door read Room 302. Inside, the room smelled like every old classroom it'd ever been in. Dust, chalk, and something faintly metallic, like the scent of rust. The desks were ancient, their wooden surfaces scarred with initials carved by students long gone. The air was thick, almost suffocating, and the silence. It wasn't just quiet. It felt deliberate, like the room was waiting for something or someone. I shook it off, telling myself it was just my imagination. But as I stood there, setting up my desk, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. The shadows in the corners seemed darker than they should be, and every creak of the floorboards made my heart skip a beat. I was determined to make a good impression, to prove I could handle this. But deep down, I couldn't ignore the creeping sense that something about this place wasn't right. As I finished arranging my things on the desk, something caught my eye. A plain white envelope lying neatly in the center. There was no name, no address, just two words scrawled across the front in looping black ink. Read carefully. My name, Mr. Lee, was written below it, which sent a chill down my spine. Someone knew I was coming. I picked it up, my fingers trembling slightly as I tore it open. Inside was a single sheet of paper, the edges slightly frayed, as if it had been handled many times before. The heading at the top read, Rules for Room 302. My eyes scanned the list, and with each rule, the knot in my stomach tightened. Do not let any child sit too close to one another. They must sit at least one desk apart. If a child stares at you for too long, look away and pretend not to notice. Ignore any scratching sounds from under the floor. Do not look at the clock between 2:11 and 2:13 p.m. If a child brings you a gift, politely decline and tell them to take it back. Do not acknowledge any child who knocks on the door after the bell rings. If you find a child standing in the corner facing the wall, do not disturb them. They will leave on their own. When the bell rings at 3:15, leave immediately. Do not stay behind to grade or organize. I read it twice, my mind racing. It had to be a joke, some kind of initiation prank for the new teacher. Every school had its quirks, right? I folded the paper and slipped it into my bag, half convinced it'd laugh about it later. But as I stood there, the room felt heavier, the silence more oppressive, and I couldn't shake the feeling that those rules weren't just a joke. Something about the way they were written, the specificity of them, made my skin crawl. Still, I told myself it was nothing. Just first day jitters. Just my mind playing tricks on me. The bell rang, snapping me out of my thoughts, and the students began to file in. They were quiet, too quiet. Not the usual chatter and laughter you'd expect from kids on the first day. They moved slowly, almost mechanically, their faces pale and their eyes distant. What struck me most was how they sat down, automatically spacing themselves out, one desk apart, without me having to say a word. It was like they already knew the rules. I tried to shake off the unease, telling myself it was just a coincidence, but the air in the room felt heavier with each passing minute. Halfway through taking attendance, I felt a pair of eyes on me. I looked up and met the gaze of a girl sitting by the window. Her stare was intense, unblinking, and it sent a shiver down my spine. I remembered the second rule. If a child stares at you for too long, look away and pretend not to notice. I dropped my eyes to the attendance sheet, my fingers tightening around the pencil. She was still staring, I could feel it, but I forced myself to keep looking down, pretending to focus on the names, until, finally, she turned away. Not long after, I heard it, a faint scratching sound, like nails dragging across wood, coming from under the floorboards. My first instinct was to look down, to figure out what it was, but the third rule echoed in my mind. Ignore it completely. I kept reading aloud, my voice steady, even as the scratching grew louder, more insistent, like something was trying to claw its way up. The kids didn't react, though. They just sat there, eerily still, as if they couldn't hear it, or as if they were used to it. The scratching eventually stopped, but the tension in the room didn't ease. Later, I noticed two students, a boy and a girl, eyeing each other with a strange, almost predatory intensity. The boy had sharp features and cold gray eyes, while the girl's teeth seemed too pointed. I remembered the first rule. Do not let any child sit too close to another. I quickly redirected the class to a new activity, breaking their focus before anything could happen. As the day dragged on, I kept glancing at the clock, careful not to look between 2:11 and 2:13. When 2:10 rolled around, I made sure to keep my eyes fixed on the wall. The room fell into an unnatural silence, the kind that makes your skin crawl. The children froze, their heads down, as if they were waiting for something. I counted the seconds in my head, my pulse racing, until finally, at 2:13, the silence lifted, and the kids moved again, like nothing had happened. Not long after, one of the girls approached my desk, clutching a small, crudely made doll. She held it out to me, her voice barely above a whisper. I made this for you. I remembered the fifth rule. If a child brings you a gift, politely decline and tell them to take it back. I forced a smile and said, "Thank you, but I can't accept it. Why don't you keep it?" Her expression darkened for a moment, but she nodded and walked back to her seat, tucking the doll into her bag. Just before the final bell, I noticed a boy standing in the corner, facing the wall. He hadn't been there a moment ago. My stomach twisted as I remembered the seventh rule: do not disturb them. They will leave on their own. I forced myself to turn away, pretending not to notice, even as the hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. The bell rang, and I grabbed my things, following the eighth rule to leave immediately. As I walked out, I couldn't shake the feeling that had just survived something far more dangerous than a first day of school. As I stepped into the hallway, my bag slung over my shoulder, I noticed the janitor mopping the floor. He was an older man, his face weathered and lined with years of hard work. He looked up as I passed, his eyes lingering on me with a strange mix of sympathy and something darker. "They didn't tell you much, did they?" he said, his voice low and gravelly. I stopped, unsure how to respond. He nodded, as if he already knew the answer. "They don't tell anyone everything. They think it's easier that way. But easier isn't always safer." His words hung in the air, heavy and ominous. I wanted to ask him what he meant, to demand answers, but he just sighed and turned back to his mopping. His shoulders hunched, like the weight of the world was pressing down on him. "Just remember," he added, without looking up, "those kids are only part of it. There's more here, things even they don't understand." I walked to my car in a daze, his words replaying in my mind. The image of the children's blank stares, the scratching under the floor, the boy in the corner. It all felt like pieces of a puzzle I couldn't quite put together. The rules, the warnings, the eerie silence. It was too much to brush off as coincidence or a prank. Something about this school wasn't right, and the deeper I got, the more I felt like I was stepping into a world I didn't understand. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, unable to shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the girl with the doll, the boy in the corner, the janitor's knowing gaze. The rules weren't just rules. They were a lifeline, and I was starting to realize that breaking them might come with consequences far worse than I could imagine. The next day started like the first, but the tension in the air was thicker, almost suffocating. I was careful, more careful than ever, to follow every rule. But it only took one moment of distraction for everything to unravel. It happened just after the final bell. I was packing up my things, my mind racing with everything I'd seen and heard, when I felt the urge to look back at the classroom one last time. It was just a glance, a split second, but it was enough. The moment I turned, I knew I'd made a mistake. The room felt different, colder, and the children, who should have been leaving, were still there, standing motionless in their seats. Their heads turned in unison, their eyes locking onto me with an intensity that made my blood run cold. The girl with the doll stepped forward, her voice soft but cutting. "You didn't follow the rules," she said, her tone almost sad, like she was disappointed in me. I tried to protest, to explain that it was just a quick look, but she raised a hand, silencing me. "Rules are rules," she said, and the other children echoed her words in a chilling chorus. Before I could react, she unwrapped the bundle she'd been holding. Inside was a small, crudely carved wooden figure. At first, I didn't understand what I was looking at until I realized it was me. The doll's face was twisted, its eyes hollow, and its mouth smudged with dark paint. My stomach churned as I stared at it, the room seeming to close in around me. The girl held the doll up, her fingers gripping its head, and with a slow, deliberate motion, she twisted it. Pain shot through my skull, sharp and blinding, like ice piercing my temples. I doubled over, clutching my head, but the pain only grew worse, spreading through every nerve in my body. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. My throat felt like it was closing, my voice stolen. The children's voices echoed in my ears, distorted and overlapping, chanting, "Rules are rules." I collapsed to my knees, the room spinning, my vision blurring. It felt like my very thoughts were being pulled apart, unraveling like threads. When the pain finally stopped, I was on the floor, gasping for air. The children were still there, watching me with those same blank expressions, but their eyes were sharper now, more focused, like they were studying me, waiting to see what it'd do next. The girl knelt down in front of me, her face inches from mine. "You have to stay here now," she said softly, her voice almost pitying. I tried to shake my head to protest, but my body wouldn't obey. I felt the doll's presence, its pull, like it was anchoring itself to my very soul. The bell rang, signaling the end of the day, but the children didn't move. They stood there, watching me, until finally, one by one, they filed out of the room. The girl was the last to leave. She paused at the door, looking back at me with those hollow eyes. "See you tomorrow, Mr. Lee," she said, her voice carrying a strange mix of menace and something almost like kindness. And then she was gone, leaving me alone in the empty classroom, the doll sitting on my desk, its twisted face staring back at me. I knew then that I was trapped, bound to this place, to these rules, and to whatever dark force controlled them. The doll wasn't just a doll. It was me, and it had a hold on me that I couldn't escape. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, though time didn't feel the same anymore. It was like I was stuck in a loop, repeating the same day over and over. I came to accept that I couldn't leave, not really. The school, the rules, the children, they were all part of me now, and I was part of them. Every morning, I'd wake up with the same heavy feeling in my chest, knowing I had to go back to room 302. The rules became second nature. I avoided the clock between 2:11 and 2:13. I ignored the scratching under the floor, no matter how loud it got. I never accepted gifts from the children, no matter how innocent they seemed. And when the bell rang at 3:15, I left immediately, never looking back. The children were different. Some of them were terrifying, their eyes too sharp, their smiles too wide. But others were almost normal, if you could call it that. They paid attention, they learned, and sometimes they even surprised me. Like the time they remembered my birthday and brought me a cake. It was small, homemade, with pink frosting, that tasted like strawberries. For a moment, it almost felt normal, like I was just a teacher celebrating with my class. But then it'd catch one of them staring at me, their eyes too still, too knowing, and the dread would come rushing back. The doll was always there, sitting on my desk, its hollow eyes watching me. I could feel its presence, like it was tied to me, pulling at something deep inside. I tried to ignore it, to focus on the lessons, but it was always there, a constant reminder of what had become. I wasn't just a teacher anymore. I was part of the rules, part of the school, and there was no escaping it. Some days, it'd think about quitting, about walking out and never coming back. But I knew it was pointless. The school wouldn't let me go. The children wouldn't let me go. And the doll. It was a part of me now, just like I was a part of this place. So I kept going, day after day, teaching the lessons, following the rules, and trying to ignore the strangeness of it all. But no matter how much I tried to convince myself that this was my life now, the dread never faded. It was always there, lurking in the corners of the room, in the silence between the bells, in the eyes of the children who watched me with a mix of curiosity and something far older, far darker. I was trapped, and I knew I always would be. Months have passed, or maybe years. It's hard to tell anymore. Time doesn't feel real in this place. Every day is the same. The rules, the lessons, the children with their hollow eyes, and two still faces. I've become a part of room 302, just like the old desks and the scratched floorboards. The doll sits on my desk, its twisted face always watching, always pulling at something deep inside me. I've stopped fighting it. There's no point. The school owns me now, and the rules are my life. Sometimes I wonder if anyone else will come, if another teacher will walk through that door, nervous and hopeful, just like I was. Will they see the envelope on the desk? Will they read the rules and laugh, thinking it's just a prank? Or will they feel it too, that creeping sense of dread, the knowledge that something here is very, very wrong? I don't know. All I know is that I can't leave. The children, the doll, the scratching under the floor, they're all part of me now. And as I sit here, staring at the empty classroom, the faint scratches on the floorboards catching the dim light, I realize something. I don't know how long I've been here, but I know I can never leave.